Awesome. Let's get it kicked off. Thank you, everyone, for helping start 501c.cc. This is our fourth episode, and you'll see some exciting announcements to build out the community online and possibly in the real world over the next few months. I'm Ashley Munson, and I'll be your moderator today. I'm with Tableau Foundation, and I'm so excited to be here with you all. The idea behind 501c.cc is simple, yet it's a huge goal to improve the impact of nonprofits by using data in two simple ways: to make decisions and take action. Showing data to make it look pretty or see a few KPIs doesn't move the needle. And because nonprofits are generally open to sharing their data, the community as a whole can learn much faster. We have a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. In addition to Lee Feinberg, the leader of 501c.cc, we have Stephanie Zidek as co-presenter from Feeding America. Stephanie, thank you so much for being here. Stephanie Zidek is Senior Analytics Manager at Feeding America and has been with the organization since 2011. She leads the data collection efforts with member food banks, utilizes the data to provide insights into member performance, and to identify peer learning opportunities. Her team is continually working to make data relevant and accessible to decision makers at all levels throughout the network. Prior to Feeding America, Stephanie worked as Market and Operations Analyst for Travelers Insurance. A little about Lee Feinberg. Lee has worked with Tableau since 2009 and started DecisionViz in 2012. Today, he's going to take you through his Design Act framework, which is quite different from how you might be used to working with analytics. Lee treats making decisions and taking action as the stars of the story, and data has a supporting role. A few housekeeping items. You'll be on mute until Q&A. So feel free to put questions into chat. You will also receive a link to a recording of the session in about a week. Lee, I'll hand the session over to you, but before I did, I just wanted to say community as well as the general Tableau community. He's been very generous with partnering with our grantees like Feeding America to help them with visual best practice and data analytics. So really excited to have this opportunity today, Lee. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's really great to be here, and this is definitely an experiment to broadcast live for the first time, especially at the conference. So that's why we're recording for sure, to make sure that we get it all to you in one good piece afterwards. So let's just kick it off quickly and get right into it. Maybe. So 501c is really the intersection of three things that were really personally important to me. One is my work with nonprofits that I just do as part of DecisionViz. The second was my work with the Tableau Foundation. And the third is having been involved with leading the New York and New Jersey Tableau user groups since 2010. And so the three of those things came together as really the idea behind forming this community. So what we're going to do today, Stephanie and I are just going to spend about 15 to 20 minutes, and we're just going to have a conversation about her work. We're not going to look at dashboards. We're not going to look at the data, because that's the thing that we'll take into account after we really understand better what Stephanie and her team are trying to accomplish. Now, here's the fun part. Stephanie has no idea what I'm going to ask her. We haven't rehearsed this. I have not really looked at their dashboards or their data. So that's the real power that I want you to understand, is that if you can take a different approach to thinking about how you do the work of visualization, it doesn't take a lot of work necessarily, but you do have to think about making the change for yourself. And so we're gonna just get started here. I'm gonna ask Stephanie a bunch of questions. We'll kind of just be handing the mic back and forth here. So give me a second here to switch over and kind of get the questions up and running. Great. So the one other thing I wanted to mention is an idea to keep in your head that we call intent before content. What that really means is that until you know the idea about what you're trying to communicate, you can't figure out how to show it visually necessarily the correct way. So intent before content is a driving idea behind what we're going to do today. All right, Stephanie. So if you could just give me a little bit of background about how you've been using Tableau and why you even started using Tableau.
Well, we've been using Tableau at our organization for almost 4 years now. We started because we were looking for a new mapping solution because our old one was being unsupported by the company that had previously released it. And so we, in our just sort of general Googling for different solutions, we came across Tableau, and what we really liked about Tableau was that it was mapping, which was what we were looking to solve at the moment. But it was so much more than that because you could bring data together with the maps or do so many other things besides just mapping. So that's kind of how we got started, and it was very, I think, project specific at the beginning, and then has just really grown from there as we have, a fair amount of data and trying to think of new ways to communicate that to audiences we haven't reached before.
It sounds very similar to how many groups, even when I was a customer, that's how I found it. It was just, I needed something better. And just spending time online and just stumbled across Tableau. So that's really great. And of course, starting with a small project is the way, of course, everybody does it. There's something in mind that they want to drive. So it seems very familiar. So just to give us a sense of who your audience is for the work you're doing and kind of what their roles are would really help start to shape how we want to think about what we're going to do.
Great. So for this particular dashboard that we're going to be talking about today, the audience starts at the executive level. They're interested in having some of those top line numbers to kind of monitor performance and where we are making progress towards our organizational goals. But then what we wanted to do was, from those top line numbers that our executive team has said these are the driving forces for our organization, is help be able to drill down into that and allow people who are managing specific areas and doing more of the day-to-day be able to use the data that is directly feeding the top line number, but it gets more into the weeds for them so that they can hopefully take action from it.
Great. That makes a lot of sense that the executives want to have that. And then, of course, once they see something, they want to ask someone else probably in the organization to go figure out what's behind what they're seeing. So, of course, you really need both pieces to work together. So what do they have, before you started with Tableau and started to build this, what did they have? How are they going about even monitoring these ideas over the last, say, years?
Primarily through Excel reports. So we are, as a data team, we're asked to produce certain, reports to be able to showcase these results at the high level. But you're exactly right that what happens is those are the high level numbers, and then some other questions are naturally raised from those results. And then they come back to the data team and say, well, we want to know, something more specific about this one, and every time, right, it's different because the questions are always different. So we're constantly responding, or have been often responding in an ad hoc sort of way, running different reports or pulling different numbers specific to whatever questions they might have at that given moment.
Sounds like that ends up being a lot of work too. And just, are these the kind of ideas they're trying to understand? Is this a daily, a weekly, a monthly kind of thing? And
right now, the data that we're getting is actually on a quarterly basis at the greatest level of detail, at the broadest amount of information. There are some data sources that we have that have portions of this data that is closer to monthly. But I would say for purposes of this conversation, we probably should think about it as quarterly. I don't know if I answered all of your questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that helps because a lot of times if you don't really understand how frequently someone's going to use it, you get caught up in saying, oh, I need to show it a certain way. But if you have quarterly data, it's not like you need to think about things at a daily basis or build the visual with that in mind. So you're going to consider that data when it's aggregated quarterly, and then you might say, okay, we're going to add it up on quarters or years, things like that. So it makes a lot of sense to do that. So let's kind of get into the real guts of how we're going to attack this. So think about this question. Maybe it might sound a little bit strange. So imagine that you had perfect data. Right? That's everybody's dream, right? If you had perfect data, and of course we've got Tableau. So with Tableau, it makes it easy to get to the data. That's the good part. So you have perfect data. Now, what is it that these executives really want to be thinking about in terms of not the data they want or the charts they want, but what kind of decisions would they be trying to make? What kind of actions would they take? Because now everything is available.
So the content area that we're focusing on today really has to do with our food sourcing. So as a hunger relief organization with food banks all across the country, food sourcing is really key to our work. And so we're looking at the volume of food coming in, which food banks are bringing in what kind of food. And I think the other piece that our teams would like to know on a regular basis is about the donors. So which donors are giving which food banks which food. And I think because those are really the key drivers is like the donors giving the food and the food banks, often their relationships either in their capacity to execute or their relationships with the donors may determine how successful they are in particular areas. That's really critical. And so really understanding, is it a donor? Is it a food bank? Like what are the areas where they might focus their attention in, whether that's capacity building or relationship management, to kind of drive different results. And then the other piece is certainly, I don't know that we'll get into this today, but also about like the type of food. So we generally prefer, for example, more nutritious foods to help our clients. But also oftentimes the nutritious foods are perishable, so that presents a different set of challenges than shelf-stable food might for our food banks.
Yeah. A lot of things you have to deal with. And I've been in some of the local food banks in New Jersey, and the one that's close to me it's the size of 5 football fields. It's crazy. The first time I walked in there, I was blown away. So yeah, I get the idea about how you have to move the food and the perishables, and there's a lot to deal with. From a logistics standpoint. So I want to dig in a little bit more. So let's just say, and I think you were kind of getting there. So let's say we could answer these questions about who's getting what food and what donors are doing, things like that. You started kind of saying how they would focus their attention. So that seems to be the nugget of where I want to talk to you about today is, okay, what is it they're looking for within that? Like, okay, how do they want to give their attention to, how would they think about that? And what would they need to see to think about, oh, that's where I want to go. That we need to tell that donor, we need to go to that food bank and tell them that donor is the one, or how would that work out? That's what I want to kind of get to.
So I think the answer is it depends on the situation, but we have teams of people at the national office that are really focused on different channels of food. So for example, food donations from retail grocery stores, food donations from manufacturers, from produce growers, and then thinking also about other sources of food where food banks may have to purchase food to supplement what they're not getting through donations. And then separately, the last kind of channel is government commodities. So food that the government has purchased and works through our organizations to distribute. So in each of these cases, the team of people at our national office have kind of 2 responsibilities. They have a set of donors that they're working with, so they're the primary relationship managers with national donors, and they also have often like regions of food banks that they're working with. And so what they're trying to identify is where is there opportunity to get more?
Okay.
and whether that is, again, is the biggest opportunity by working with the donor. So for example, some retail grocery stores have goals, like national chains have goals to have zero waste. It's a win-win for this situation where the retailer is not wasting anything. They don't pay dumping costs. They also get a donation credit, but it's a win for our organizations too, because it's a great source of nutritious food for our clients. So that's really, that's just one example. And then on the other side is many food banks also have teams of people to differing degrees in what their responsibilities are, but they're also focusing on their local relationships. And so our national office teams may work with the teams at the food banks to say, how can we eliminate some of the barriers? And again, whether that's with the donor or is it a capacity issue at the food bank, and what are some of the things that our team knows from their experience to kind of help the food bank perhaps advance their capabilities.
So out of those, you listed off a whole lot of things. That's great that you have, there's a lot, of course there's always a lot, it's never just one, but it helps give a sense of what's going through their mind here. So if you had to pick, let's just say one to start with, right? Because here's the thing. A lot of what we see out in the world is people create, say, one dashboard or a few dashboards. And they think, wow, that's going to solve every question I have to answer and give me every decision-making possibility I need. And that tends to not be reality. And usually they do that by just jamming a lot of filters and choices on there, which make it overcomplicated. And it's still just about looking at the data, and it's not really about helping them do the analysis as much. So you may actually, in reality, because of all the things you listed, it could be multiple sets of dashboards that you build that address each of these problems. We're not going to get to that today, but I just want to emphasize that because you have these, they may be so different that you have to design them differently. It goes back to that idea I said in the beginning about intent before content. If you're trying to help somebody at the local food bank level understand something versus the executive, you might not use the same sets of dashboards for that. So it's good that you listed a lot. And it's just good you have a lot of things to solve, right? That's what this is all about. And you just got to bite one off at a time, right? And so we'll do that. So just whether you want to pick the one you think is most important or you think one that you just want to work on today, why don't we just do that? Can you just talk about which of these you think we should tackle?
Yeah, I think focusing on based on the data I think that we have available for today, I think focusing on the food bank sort of performance, they're sourcing sort of year over year. And then if we want to pick one channel, is that what you're thinking? Or all channels?
It's up to you.
All right, I'm gonna.
See how it goes.
Okay.
Playing it by ear.
Great.
Slide.
Well, I would say let's start with all channels, because usually what we like to do as an organization is to see, like, you start to kind of dig in where is the food sourcing kind of up or down overall, and then if it's, you know, a large, I guess, swing versus last year or prior period, then you start to dig into, okay, well, what channel is driving that, and then go from there. So I think start with the overall, but focusing on the food bank side of things rather than the donor for now.
All right. So I'm going to bring this up, and then I'll just ask you to walk us through a little bit what you have, and we'll start to see how well it reflects what we've talked about so far.
Sounds good.
Great.
Okay, so this dashboard is really, this is, in my mind, you know, the higher level executive view of the food sourcing operations. And so on the left, you can see this is total pounds. The bars just represent the volume. The line represents the percent change over the prior year. And then the little reference lines there represent what our goals were. So the organization sets goals each year, and then, you know, obviously we hope to exceed those goals. I think I only have here goals for the last 4 years, but you can kind of see how that plays out. And then on the right-hand side is really taking that total view and breaking it down into that channel look. So really understanding, as you can kind of see, which is not a surprise to folks in our organization, but retail, the green line here, has been the driver of much of our growth over the years. So I think that's really important, but it's also important for our executives. They want to see where all of the channels are trending, and then kind of get a sense of their relative, well, my thinking is their relative size as it contributes to the overall goals.
So just as a starting point, just thinking about this as an information level, you talked about this being a quarterly view. So if I was starting as an executive, would it make more sense possibly to see this maybe the last 2 years or something, maybe totaled like this, or we could see all the years, but maybe we would show the last few years as quarters or something, because I'm looking at this and thinking, wow, I'm the executive and I'm trying to understand what's happening maybe at a quarterly level, but I don't know because I just see a number and the number's gone up, which is good, but maybe one quarter was killer meaning really good, and then maybe the other ones were like really bad, and that one just made up for everything, and maybe you want things more evenly distributed. I don't know. Is that typically how you think about it, even from or do you also, it comes in peaks and valleys because of seasons and holidays and things like that? Might be a factor. The one thing here, though, too, I see is it's great that you have targets. One of the key issues is that when we think about decision making and you look at the number, I ask, well, how do you know what's good or what's bad? And if you don't have a target, you can't answer the question. So if you don't know if you're doing good or bad, then you also don't necessarily know if you can make a decision. So the fact that you have targets here is really good. Now, do these happen to break down by quarters too, or are they just at the annual level?
We do have quarterly targets. I can't be sure if I have them in here, so I'll have to look. The other piece that I haven't really visualized here, but is we do have targets by channel also. But for me, when I started to do all of this, that's when things got real busy, so I didn't put any of the targets in when we started digging to the breakdown by channel.
No problem. So here's a question. Instead of this saying pounds versus goal, I want you to think for a second about a title that has more action around it. It might say something like, do this if this, something like that. Like, it could even be, we're just experimenting here. It could even be this as simple as call a local, if it's an executive, email the head of the food bank if we see X happening.
If I'm putting myself in the executive's shoes, I think it would be contact the channel manager if results are not meeting the goals. I don't know if that's specific enough.
So contact channel manager if below target, something like that?
Yes, yes.
Great. So even here, you can start to get a different, I always call it like a vibe. So if someone looks at this right away, I like to think it's making a direct line into their brain. It's like I'm tuning into this idea of what I'm going to be thinking about, what I see on the rest of the page here. And so because pounds versus goals, I don't really know, like I understand what that means, but I'm not necessarily getting right into how it's going to help me do what I'm trying to figure out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I see it kind of spurs that action almost immediately and doesn't leave them wondering what to do with this information.
Yeah, and this can be the hardest part is transitioning your thinking from data, because we're so used to thinking about data. And that's how people we work with are used to thinking about it too. I want to see a trend line or show me a bar chart for these numbers. Yours is, again, a little bit more specific because you do have the goals, but it's breaking away from that idea and thinking more in this specific, this actionable terms. That can really be a struggle for people just to break away. And even when you do it, then when you show it to other people, they don't get it because they're just like, I thought you were just going to show me the trend line for the sales or the amount of food we collected. So there's a lot going on within this that you have to work people through. So let's take a look here. So let's We can still keep pounds per goal because we're going to play with that in a little bit. But I'm thinking about this particular chart, which is good, but there's a lot going on in here because I see, we've got the bars, we've got the targets, we've got the change. So there's a lot of rich information here, which I like. So let's go into that view and see what we have. So it looks like you don't necessarily, do you think you have quarterly data? I brought, so maybe still annual targets?
Yeah, the targets might be annual for now.
Okay, so let's just not play with that yet. We'll just kind of see, getting the lay of the land. Like I told you in the beginning, this is just real live. We haven't looked at the data, and together we're just rolling with it. So one thing I find too that when you think about your audience, right? Like a lot of times we build something and we understand it, but a lot of times our audience, they're not very necessarily that analytical. We know they're probably not analysts. And a lot of times they're just not very analytical. So to give them all of these pieces might be a little bit much. The other thing is you could even potentially explain it to one person or a couple people, but then it always gets in the hands of somebody else. And then they're not sure necessarily what all the pieces are. So I like to try to break things up and simplify them only down to the point where they make sense. And I say simplify, but doesn't mean simplistic. It's just try to get things going. So what I'm thinking about, and I'll hand the mic back to you in a second, is I like the targets. I think I maybe want to do something a little bit more visual with that. And I want to break out this change just so we can have it labeled a little bit better. I don't know that they have to overlap. It is pretty common to try to do this overlap, but I tend to like to just separate it out. And we'll see what it looks like, and maybe we won't like it, but again, we want to try to get that message across about are we at goals or not. So let's see what happens. And you can comment on things while I'm going and tell me if you think you can make, I won't see if you make a frowny face, but tell me if you think you like it, you don't like it, because also your perspective of, what works for your audience. I don't. So you might say, yeah, I tried that before and they didn't like it. And then we could talk about why they didn't like it. Or you might say, yeah, that's great. I really like that. I think it's going to go well for them. So all fair game here.
All right.
So let's take a look. And we've got, and you can walk me through this too. So I'm thinking about, which of these is your goal?
Yes.
Okay. So we got that. I'm just going to bring that out here so I can see it separately. Okay, so you only have the goals for the last few years here, it looks like.
Right.
Fine, okay. And then I think I want to break this off separately so that we can not have a dual axis for a moment, just to have that out. And then let's try this idea. Let's see if we can put, instead of that line that we had, let's see if we can make that something like maybe a little circle. And we could shrink that down a bit. And Feeding America, your color is kind of orange?
Yes.
So
orange and a dark green.
So I don't have the direct colors here, but let's just pick an orange to get the idea. All right. And we can knock off the labels for a second. And then maybe we'll get this to a dual axis. This one. Oh, and of course Tableau loves to add the color stuff back in here. So now we've got a little something like that to show where the mark is. We could play around with that maybe a little bit later. And then we've got the line down here. So now I don't know, how do you feel about this kind of view? Do you think it is any better in terms of highlighting where things are? Because I have a couple other ideas after this that we could tackle.
I do like splitting the year over year line separate from the bar chart, because I think it's still relative. You can still see it sort of above and below. The one question with the circles as the shape is because in some cases, these numbers are fairly large, and so in some cases it's fairly close to the target, and I'm not sure like in which cases have we actually, like where it sort of overlaps the bar, does that mean we made it or not?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to see. So I know when you had it in the other view, you could kind of see where the bars were.
Right, if there was a space between the
a little bit of
line
space.
or not. Yeah.
Great. So here's an idea. Let me show you another idea here that I like to use this one. I'll instead of showing where the mark is, because the other thing is you might see if you're above or below, which is good. Sometimes when they're close, it's hard to see. The challenge is sometimes because of the number, you might know if you're above or below, but what you don't know is how much from this. So for example, this view, maybe you don't know how much difference it is between the target in terms of actuals or percentage compared to this one. It's hard to know. I mean, you could maybe if you have a tool tip, but then you'd have to do the math in your head. And I always say, I'm lazy. I don't want to do math, right? I want the visual to do everything for me. That's what I want to get the information from that. So do you think it's more important to know the actual difference or the percentage or both? How would they use that?
Well, in our reporting today, I think we provide both. But I think probably if I had to choose one that I think they refer to most frequently, it's the percentage. How close percentage-wise are we to our goal?
So let's take a look at that.
And I'd like to pause for just a second. Are we supposed to be sharing on that screen or we're good? Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, just checking on the technical piece midstream. Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
Great.
All right, so let's just do a little bit of calculated fields in here. So we've got total pounds, non-aggregated, and goal. Okay, so just walk me through, make sure I get to the right things here.
I might have something in there that's percent of goal, because I started playing with this earlier. I think it's just called, yeah.
So let's take a look at that equation. Okay, so if we just bring that out, let's see what that looks like. Great. So I think that's what we're at. So here's what we can do. Great. So what I want to do first is get rid of this one. So we don't want it overlapping. And then we can just keep the same idea here on the bars. Let's just get some size going here maybe. And maybe we could also just emphasize it with something like this. Put it on, get some color going. And let's just say we something like this and just get like positive and negative. That way it'll just jump out. And we can see here, right? It's 1.5. It's a lot. I mean, it's 3 times in theory off, right? Which I don't think we could tell that from how it was before with the bars or certainly not with the little circles.
Right.
How do you feel about something like this?
Yeah, I like that. I think like you said, you're able to kind of see that difference much better than if you could see the tiny small space between the line that I had before and the bar. So I think this is definitely a better visual representation.
All right, so let's do a couple more things here. So the first thing is, I want to see how you feel about this one, because I'm always thinking about what's going to hit someone the most. What's really important? And I'm wondering, while this trend is good, it's what if we did that? So that the first thing they actually see is how they're doing against the goal without worrying about if it's going up or down. If, again, this is all centered around the idea of if they look at the trend, are they going to act on that? Versus if they see the trend here starting to say, oh my gosh, wait, we're down 0.8% this year. And that's just immediately where their attention is drawn, especially because you were above target 1.5% last year. That's a huge swing. And that they might not even care about anything else on the page at this point because they want to understand what's going on there.
Yeah, I think I mean it's not natural like in my way of like thinking from before, but I think you're right that it's like the numbers of the bars, the height of the bars in terms of the overall volume is like interesting, but you're right, that's not the thing that drives them to action. And I think, we know that we've been setting our goals higher and higher each year. So, I mean, those are good things, but to see kind of like, are we on trend to make those goals is the is the kind of the key thing. But now I'm wondering, because I think the second question is, so when I see the minus 0.8%, the next thing someone wants to know is, well, is that because of where we set the goal, or is there something else going on, like compared to last year? Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing, so yes, we're slowing down in our rate of growth year over year, but it is still positive. So we're still more than last year. I think it's the question that I don't know if it's used to comfort themselves or like to say like, okay, like, yeah, this isn't exactly where we want to be, but let's not panic to everything. Again, I'm not sure that it drives action, I guess, but it seems to be oftentimes the next thought that comes from that.
Well, that's good. I think this is helpful to talk through how you might think they would react to this. So from what you just said, too, again, I would probably even just move the trend up because, again, they want to see that. And then they could look at the kind of the specific numbers, right, at that point, just to see where it's going. Yeah, and I don't think this is necessarily it's a panic issue, right, or anything at this stage. What you're trying to understand is, where am I? And do I have something, like, let's say that was up really high. You might just say, wow, we did a great job this year, and we probably don't even need to do anything at this point. Now, that's probably not true because I'm sure that there's always things you're thinking about improving. This is a constant challenge, but you're going to be thinking about it totally differently, right? On a positive swing versus something that's a negative swing, you are going to have a different emotional reaction as well as a business reaction to that. So that's why I always like to force these things front and center, even if it's painful, right? A lot of people, it's the data is the data. In the end, however you want to show it, you can't hide the truth. Well, you can hide the truth, but you shouldn't hide the truth, right? That's not the goal here. The goal is, especially with something as serious as what we're dealing with in terms of food sourcing and helping people. We don't want to mess around with that. So one other thing here I want you to think about, and then we'll go and do one more. We'll do one more view, I think, before we wrap up. What would you now put as a title to this? So yes, technically it is versus goals, but a lot of what I like to do is write this out as kind of like a question. Again, because it puts something in. I always like to plant the idea in someone's head. So this could even. I'm not going to tell you what I think it is because it's probably what you're going to want anyway, but I'll let you kind of think about an idea for it.
Well, I think the simple question is, have we met our goal? Because I think we're showing multiple years. I mean, always I think people want to see like what are the most recent results, but I think the context is helpful to see what are the past results, like how does that relate? So it's a little bit of have we met our goal this year, I think is the main question. And then the secondary question is, and how is that compared to last year?
I think that's a good start. I'll just kind of give you my thoughts on it, but we won't try to tailor this to the nth degree. So it gives me a couple of thoughts here. One, I think it's not bad. It's a good beginning. What I'm thinking about here is I'm almost wondering if I would even exclude in this chart the change year to year. Okay. This is just why I'm thinking about it. I would probably still put it on the same page, but I'm not sure exactly where it would fit because I'm trying to think about it doesn't tie to this necessarily. Now it is related. So what I would probably want to do is figure out a way to state this maybe that ties it together, like, and are we growing or something like that, like are we meeting our goals and are we something along those lines to tie the two pieces together in their mind? Because like you said, when you walked me through it, yes, we're down in terms of meeting our goal, but we're still positive in terms of our growth. So there's really two sides to the story here. So it's not just meeting the goal. So you have to kind of think about that together. The other piece that really hit home is I'm wondering if even outside of this, if next on the top of the page, like right next to the title or something, it should just be something like goal versus target. I'm just thinking out loud, but basically to show this one block. 2018 results or something like that. Or really this question. Really maybe there's just one. Did we meet our goal in 2018? That might be the one piece, and it might be all by itself, one little positive or negative bar, just by itself. Then, because then at least then again, it's that levels of, nope, we didn't meet our goal. Then I look at this piece, because here it's like I have to look over here. It's not that it's hard to look over here, but it's real. I always go for the jugular. Just look, put it front and center. This is what it is. I don't want to have to fish around. Now here we've made it red, so their eye's going to be drawn to it. The thing is though, they might see this and not kind of read the title here yet. So again, it's a matter of that idea of tuning them in and thinking through that. So this is good. I think we have a bunch of different ideas to play with here as a start, and it feels like you kind of like this as a concept.
I do.
So what I want to do is go back here and see if that next stage, because you said now they're going to want to know more. So how do you feel like if we showed them this view now, do you think that these line charts as you have them would really be the thing that would be coming next into their mind? And if not, what do you think is coming in their head next?
I think, no, I mean, I don't think the lines are going to tell them the thing they want to know. I think the next question is like, okay, so we didn't meet our goal. Was that driven by any particular channel? So is there some channel that's a more concern in terms of performance than others? And so that would be kind of, to see, I guess, if which channels were above or below their own goals.
Okay. So we're still on kind of the goal. So they have their own goals too.
Yes.
So just to see if anybody, and that might pinpoint, you might say everybody except one channel particular was it, and that's the one that pulled us below our target, and then you could really focus in on that one to understand a little bit more about what was going on there, right? So do we have that information in here?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, so maybe walk me through where that might be.
Yeah, so if we go, I think if we can go here, and then there is a channel by goals up there,
okay.
or channel goals by year.
All right.
So yeah, and it is linked by channel and year, so we should be able to bring in the goal, I think,
okay.
for each channel.
So if we just did, so we've got our channels. So if we did this, and then just for now, let's just make this a bar, just so we can see it a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're saying we have the goals here.
Yes.
So if we just brought the goals, the goal in.
Oh, I think you're going to want to use the goal full digits because the goals are stated in millions.
Ah, gotcha. So we've got our goals. Okay, so again, last 4 years.
Right.
Okay, this is good. I'm liking this.